Donald Trump is making moves to save his candidacy and perhaps save his butt when it comes to some of the criminal challenges against him, some of the trials that he's facing. And so the big update for this week is that attorneys for the former president just yesterday asked the US Supreme Court to block a criminal trial over his alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And I know what you're probably thinking. Wait, didn't he already do this? There's so many appeals, and yes, there are, but we are going to try, as we do every day, to wade through it because this is actually a new thing and it's consequential. Not only for like the path that this case will take, but also whether it takes any path at all. Because there are a variety of ways that the Supreme Court can respond to this, and they all matter. They're all very different, and so we're gonna try to break it down. But I wanna remind you what the stakes are in this particular case. Remember, this is the January 6th coup, basically, the coup flavored trial. So in that case, Trump was charged with conspiracy to defraud the US, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of and attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. A number of different charges having to do with not so much the violence aspect of January 6th, although that is certainly a part of it, but his effort to have an alternate slate of electors sworn in, all of that sort of stuff. So Trump has previously appealed to the Supreme Court on related matters. So in January, he appealed over his ballot access in Colorado. They had obviously, the Supreme Court of Colorado had banned him from the ballot. In that case, the arguments have already been held, and we're currently waiting to see what the Supreme Court is going to do. Although it looks like they're likely on a path to putting him back on the ballot. But in this area, it has to do once again with the absolute immunity that Donald Trump and his legal team say that he has. And in their appeal to the Supreme Court, they say, if a president can be criminally charged for actions taken while in office, Trump's lawyers warned such prosecutions will recur and become increasingly common, ushering in destructive cycles of recrimination. They added, without immunity from criminal prosecution, the presidency as we know it will cease to exist. So that is their argument. Their argument effectively is a massive slippery slope wherein if you don't allow the president to get away with literally any crime he chooses to commit, then no president can ever just go back into their life because they will face all these charges. It's got a couple of flaws as an argument, as I'm sure you're aware. One, this hasn't happened to former presidents, and it's probably just a coincidence that they didn't commit a bunch of crimes. And also, it's not likely to happen in the future because unlike like a civil lawsuit where you can kind of just talk to a lawyer and launch it whenever you want, a criminal prosecution like this is not an easy thing. There are a lot of different bars to action in that area. Steps that must be taken, standards that must be met. Someone has to effectively potentially put their legal career on the line to prosecute this sort of thing. There's a reason we don't see these sorts of lawsuits thrown about willy-nilly. But they need to pretend that it will be both willy and nilly as a defense for Donald Trump. And so the Supreme Court being asked to weigh in on this question, and more importantly, to allow the furtherance of the trial to be stopped while they consider it. Now, in a related way, back in December, the judge presiding over the case put the trial on pause and postponed it indefinitely while the appeals court considered the immunity question. We got earlier this month action on that when, in a unanimous ruling, the US Court of Appeals rejected Trump's immunity claim. Okay, so it's complex, I get it. So up until this point, you've gone through multiple steps of the American judicial system, and the effectively second highest one is like, get out of here with that nonsense. What are you talking about, absolute immunity? The only one waiting to weigh in is the Supreme Court, okay? And there's a couple of different options that they could take in this. And so let's try to wade through these and figure out what might happen. So the court can deny a stay in the case, basically deny stopping the case from moving forward, which would send it back to the US District Court and allow Judge Tanya Chutkan to restart the trial. So that's one of, I guess, the fastest ways that this could go forward, although it wouldn't necessarily rule out the possibility that they would have to raise and adjudicate the question of absolute immunity at a later date. You could have those things theoretically working concurrently, so that's an interesting road that they could take. The court could allow a brief stay and then deny a petition of review from Trump. Doing so would allow the appeals court ruling to stand, denying the former president immunity. So there's nothing inherently wrong with that option, that they would briefly stay forward progress on the trial and then decide, no, at the end of the day, we're not going to take up what the appeals court did for further review. We're just gonna let it stand. That would be very reasonable, especially because the Court of Appeals is totally right in what they said. But the issue there is, like, are they not gonna rule? Like, the Supreme Court is not gonna rule on this in these unprecedented times. I kind of find that hard to believe. They could, in fact, instead fast track the case, as the Supreme Court did with the Colorado ballot eligibility case. In doing so, the immunity case would be given priority and likely be heard in the coming weeks. So that would kind of delay the process, but perhaps not so much so that we wouldn't have clarification before either the primary is done, or more likely at least when the general election is done. And the final option is to leave the case on the court's regular schedule, which would likely delay oral arguments until after the general election in November. That is kind of the worst possible option. It's not the least likely option necessarily, but if they do that, it is likely that we will never actually have this case. We'll never have clarification on any of this stuff. We'll just kind of spin our wheels and wait, and the election will happen, and maybe Donald Trump becomes president again, and maybe he just shuts down this entire thing. That would be by far the most cowardly option that the Supreme Court could take, but that does not mean that they're not going to take it. And there's kind of a meta fifth option that they can take. So all of those are still true, the 4 different roads they could take with the consequences that come from those. But I would also bear in mind that they just ruled on the ballot access thing, and everybody's been saying maybe they want to have some sort of grand bargain. Maybe they're going to put him back on the ballot, but that maybe makes them look biased, particularly Clarence Thomas. So what if they could sweeten the deal with something that isn't to Donald Trump's benefit? Well, there's a couple of options that we just laid out that they could couple with the ballot access thing, wherein he's able to be on the ballot, but he also doesn't get the absolute impunity that he wants. And everybody's happy, I guess. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people are happy, and maybe he still goes to jail. So I don't know. I don't know what's gonna end up happening with that. For those two things to be bundled together, they would kind of have to do one of the ones that has a more expedited timeline. And that would be good for a lot of reasons that don't even have to do with the grand bargain. People, as I have said over and over, deserve to know. They deserve to have finality on this case. We can't just wait until November or possibly never to find out. So I would definitely keep in mind the possibility of them achieving some sort of grand bargain. But even in advance of that, they would have to announce what they're gonna do on this case. So hopefully that will come sooner rather than later.